Okay, welcome to this festive edition of CineLit. My name is Adam Marsh, and I'm joined as ever by my co-hosts Rebecca Taylor.
Hi.
And Daryl Buxton.
Hi, everyone.
So we're back again for Christmas. It's been an odd year to launch a podcast. I'm assuming we usually thought that we would be doing some sort of best films of 2020 at this time of the year. Now we will be looking at some of the biggest hits in cinemas for the last 2020. But it's been an odd year, and I think one for the archives. I think so. We're going to do Christmas movies instead because who needs cheering up more than the world at this moment? So we're going to have a little delve into some of our favourite Christmas movies and a bit of a chat over some hidden gems and maybe some things that you don't necessarily think are Christmas movies, but maybe will become your favourite. So, Christmas movies, guys, are we fans or not fans?
Well, I must admit, Adam, I'm a bit of a Mrs. Scrooge on that. So, yeah, I have a small selection of Christmas films I like to watch, but on a whole, I'm not a fan of Christmas films.
Okay, Daryl, what's your take on Christmas movies?
Yeah, I love Christmas and I do like Christmas films, but I tend to sort of go for the films that are set at Christmas rather than the ones that fully embrace Christmas. So anything that has got people in the background doing their Christmas shopping while a heist or a sort of argument between a couple or something is going on in the foreground is more my sort of forte. You know, I like the drama to be up front and the Christmas to be sort of in the background somewhere.
Okay, well, it looks like I am designated the Christmas fun guy then, aren't I? I am the guy who loves Christmas movies and fully enjoys and embraces the sentimentality and cheesiness of Christmas movies. They get a pass, a big fat pass from me every year. I do love them, apart from Love Actually, obviously. That goes without saying, I think. Terrible film. So, yeah, let's have some obviously, one of the big discussions over the last few years has been one of my favourite Christmas movies, on whether it actually qualifies as a Christmas movie, and that's Die Hard. So what's people's takes on Die Hard as a Christmas movie?
I have to make a confession, Adam. I've never seen Die Hard.
Oh. Rebecca. Oh.
And Quad puts on the Die Hard and Die Hard 2 double bill so often at Christmas.
Every year for about 10 years, I think. We've sometimes flirted with a Die Hard Lethal Weapon double bill at Christmas because both of those movies.
That'd work, yeah.
It kind of worked, but Lethal Weapon's a bit of a downer, to be honest. It's not the happiest of films, unlike the mass slaughter and killings of Die Hard. Nothing's more festive than shooting terrorists in an airport, So we kept with Die Hard too. But yeah, no, I mean, Die Hard was always on one of my favourite films growing up, and I don't think I ever really pegged it as a Christmas movie in the sense of like, oh, I must watch this at Christmas kind of Christmas movie. I watch it all year round, and I think it was released during the summer when it was actually released. So I think it was a Christmas film release. So it's only like in the last 10, 15 years where it's become embraced as a Christmas movie. And with us showing it in the cinema every year at Christmas, it's become part of my Christmas tradition to go to watch Die Hard and possibly Die Hard 2 at Christmas. So it's developed that tradition and that fondness and that connection to Christmas. But it is a Christmas film in its plot, in its storyline. It's set at Christmas. It's got Christmas as part of the actual mechanics of the plot. It's not just in the background while the film's happening. The reason why it's happening is because it's at Christmas. They have Christmas songs all the way through it. They have connections to Christmas. The finale has got a connection to Christmas as well. The actual. I'm trying not to spoil it now for Becky. This is really. the finale, the end of the movie has a connection to Christmas as well. So it has got those links to Christmas. In my mind, qualifies as a Christmas movie. So end discussion.
But yeah, this is what I was talking about with my preferences earlier, Adam. It's as you say, it's the Christmas themed movie that you can release in July. So right up my street. You can watch it any time of year. It works anytime you see it, any time of year, any season. But there's something special about it when you watch it at Christmas. The theme really then kicks in. So, and it's that type of movie that I sort of prefer to ones about Santa Claus and his elves and people buying Christmas presents. As you say, let's shoot some terrorists.
Yeah, what's more Christmassy than that? I do find it fascinating that sort of like nowadays, if you make a Christmas movie, you will release it at Christmas. If you got something set at Christmas, an action movie, a comedy, or whatever, you would release it probably mid-November to get an initial run of ticket sales in November, and then a second wave of ticket sales for the second run December. People want to see close to Christmas. Whereas, like, that wasn't always the case. I was looking back at some of my favourites. Gremlins is one of my favourites. And that was released slap bang in the summer in America. It was released at Christmas over here, but it was released slap bang in the middle of the summer. It was a summer blockbuster in many ways. And that's ridiculously Christmassy in the sense of, like, snow, small town America, snow everywhere. It's a wonderful life with monsters, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it came out the same time as Ghostbusters, didn't it? And I remember over here, Ghostbusters seemed to come out just a couple of weeks before Christmas, and then Gremlins, I think, was sort of bang on, or I don't think it actually played sort of locally until after Christmas. I remember seeing it January '85. So, so even then, it missed the boat by 11 and a half months. Then, yeah, weird, really. But as you say, it was a summer blockbuster in the States, and that wasn't really sort of commented on. It was just a norm.
Well, when do we think the first sort of like, we're going to make this for Christmas and we're going to cash in on Christmas by releasing this film at Christmas and being a Christmas film? Was that inherent all the way through cinema?
I think it probably didn't really start happening until after that mid-80s period. I think something like the Dudley Moore Santa Claus was one of the first. Not a great one to start with, really.
It's a shocker, isn't it?
Yeah. If you try to set that tradition of releasing films at Christmas for Christmas, what a one to start with, But
I remember watching that as a kid and loving it, and then watched it again. I thought, I'll watch it again, maybe show it Rowan. And I'm sat watching and thinking, God, this is awful. Like, I mean, I'm happy to suspend disbelief. I'm happy to put aside naffness. Howard the Duck is one of my favourite movies. I'm happy to put those things aside. But this was just too far. It was just awful. Have you seen that one, Becky?
No, I was going to say,
yeah, don't bother.
Didn't realise it even existed. So.
Yeah, Santa Claus the movie. John Lithgow was the villain, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So it wasn't all bad. It had some good points to it. But yeah, it was pretty bad. Obviously, Scrooge came out in '88.
Very soon after, yeah.
So that was designed as a Christmas movie vehicle for Bill Murray.
What's interesting about Scrooge is that it's become, as Becky was saying earlier, about how you were saying how your dad watches Scrooge without the D, but me and Adam sort of jumped in and said, "Oh, you mean the Alistair Sim version?" And you said, "Oh, no, the Albert Finney, the musical." And I think when Scrooge came out with Bill Murray, I think that's a sign that every generation sort of has its own version of A Christmas Carol that it sort of focuses on. Because there are a lot of people who love Scrooged who maybe don't know about the films that came before.
It's an odd one because it is in some ways, it's very 80s Scrooged. It's about, greed. Greed is good. The 80s Wall Street thing. It's very much that. But, have a look at yourself, mate. It's not the way to live, is it? Being evil and horrible, Turn over a new leaf. It's Christmas.
I find it interesting that we're talking about a lot of American films here. Like, definitely America's the one for Christmas. But
Becky, if you want to chat about the Nativity movies, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
No,
You can chat all the way through Nativity 1, Nativity Rocks, Nativity Where's My Donkey. You know, I'm more than happy for you to watch all those movies and come back and report to us.
Yeah, but it's like in that time, it was a sort of a formula that they had to have a big house. Yeah, it's like with the Home Alone films, I'm thinking like the house is absolutely massive, and it's just it's a very Americans are good at Christmas because it's all about consumerism and everything. So yeah, it's interesting you say. I haven't seen Scrooged, but yeah, it's interesting that you said that.
Yeah, in some ways, Scrooge is a little bit out of step of that kind of, like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, Home Alone, those kind of ones where they live in fairly big houses and have big family. I mean, the house in Home Alone is ridiculous, really. I mean, I've watched it again this year with my son, and every time I watch it, the more I sit thinking, like, he's got to be like an accountant for the mafia or something like that. Because because in the Home Alone film, they keep mentioning things like we're not very rich. We know my brothers paid for these first class flights for us to go over to France for Christmas. So they're making all these. Obviously, it sounds like an accountant. It's my brother paid for these tickets. The wife is the house is in my wife's name. It's all these different things where it's just like, you're a mafia accountant, aren't you? That's how you got a house that big.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, ridiculous.
Yeah, well, the genes have obviously passed down to the children, which is why Macaulay's so sort of devious and so keen to sort of exert violence on other people, I guess.
Exactly. Well, you go against the king. Wet bandits, they're called the wet bandits. They going up against Macaulay Culkin. You're going up against a mafia kid. But what I say about Scrooge was obviously it was very relevant in the 80s, perhaps not the message people wanted to hear in the 80s, where consumerism, capitalism was running rife, but arguably still massively relevant today. I think that's one of the joys of the Christmas Carol story. Full stop. It's relevant ever since it was written.
Don't be miserable.
But don't be miserable, but also don't be horrible and miserly and manipulative and horrible. Yeah, ultimately, don't be horrible. And that's a universal message. Don't be horrible.
Yeah, I always wonder if there are people on one side of the political spectrum who watch Scrooged or watch A Christmas Carol and sort of root for Ebenezer, and.
I don't believe that.
And are upset by the end of the film.
He was just trying to make a living.
He loses.
Yeah. I love A Christmas Carol, but I always think, was it going to last? Is it going to last? Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and then after that, forget that. I'm going to get Bob Cratchit back in.
Yeah, in the new year, it cuts his hours. It makes him redundant.
Yeah, we need. This is what we need: a sequel. Yeah.
Christmas Carol 2, austerity era.
Yeah. Maybe someone will look through some old drawers or something in a big mansion somewhere and find some old Charles Dickens papers where he actually wrote the follow-up, and it just changed the whole thing.
I think it's one of those joys of cinema. Is the great things about cinema in general is that when you watch a film, is seeing yourself on screen and watching a film where you think, oh God, that could be me, or even an aspirational aspect where you think that could be me in the future, Whereas I think with Christmas Carol, well, no, I just meant in general, but things like Christmas Carol, I don't think people look at that film and see themselves in Ebenezer, even if they are a total Scrooge. They don't see themselves. They always see themselves as the nice person, even the most evil person in the world will look at that movie and side with Tiny Tim and Bob Cratchit.
Yeah, identify with the good guys.
Yeah. Donald Trump is watching that movie and going, well, of course you should buy the biggest turkey for the Cratchit family. I would do the same. It's like, okay, not sure. Moving on to something. Gary, you were talking about films that you like that are set at Christmas, but are not necessarily Christmas movies. Now, Programming a Cinema every year at Christmas and having to and liking Christmas and enjoying Christmas and wanting to put on an interesting buffet of cinema at Christmas. I found over the 10, 12 years of programming in Derby that you can program lots of Christmas films, but ultimately there's a cabal of about 7 or 8 films that will actually draw an audience at Christmas. And you're talking Die Hard, you're talking Home Alone, you're talking Elf, you're talking It's a Wonderful Life, obviously the perennial favorite, Muppets Carol. There's only a handful. You can go outside of that and show things like The Bishop's Wife, the Cary Grant movie. You could show that, but no one turns up for it. You could even show some of the old musicals, and they don't tend to do that well. White Christmas and things like that. And the Judy Garland one, which has a section set at Christmas. Meet Me in St. Louis, yeah. So we've shown that previously. And, they do all right, but ultimately, people want to see Die Hard. They want to see Home Alone. They want to see Elf. They want to see It's a Wonderful Life. Why do you think we are not as expansive with our habits at Christmas?
I think people like comfort, really. And I think we've been talking a lot about A Christmas Carol already. And I think A Christmas Carol sort of sets the template for everything you need in a Christmas film. And there have been a lot of remakes of it, a lot of versions of it. There have been a lot of sort of spin-offs of it that sort of, imitate the story with its own version of the characters. But even films that don't seem to be linked to A Christmas Carol use the trappings of it quite often. And I think it's that sort of comfort zone that people like, as Becky was saying, things like The Big House, and you've always got to have snow in Christmas movies. When does it ever snow at Christmas? But there's always snow in the movies at Christmas. And
people in Hollywood have heard of this thing called snow. They recognise it as it is important. They don't know what it is, but they recognise it important. They don't have weather over there. They just have sunshine.
Yeah. So I think all this sort of helps to identify what people actually see as a Christmas movie. And I think that's what people want. They want that sort of coziness, they want that comfort, and they want to feel good at the end of it.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. I think it's like what Adam said as well. You're not looking for particularly a masterpiece at Christmas. You just want something that's going to make you feel warm inside and just cozy. Yeah.
Do you think that's what I mean? Obviously, there's been a few attempts at making horror films set at Christmas, and there's a relatively increasing, but none of them seems to ever make much money. And if they do, they don't tend to make money because of the Christmas.
Yeah, there was the big controversy in America in the mid-'80s when a film called Silent Night, Deadly Night came out, and it was all about a killer Santa. And it caused more outrage and more protests, particularly from sort of women's groups and parents groups, than any other horror film of its time. And it was just suppressed in the States, and it was sort of vilified. And I think there was this huge reaction against it. It's like, you can't do that to Christmas, And I mean, it's continued. It had a sequel a couple of years later. And
I've watched the sequel this Christmas, this week, actually. Yeah, the 40 minutes of new footage were interesting. The 40 minutes that were lifted from the first film and dumped in wholesale as a flashback, 40-minute flashback, was an interesting decision.
I know, yeah. That's how to do it on the cheap, how to make part 2 on the cheap. But the point is that the first movie was almost buried, by this wave of protest, but it survived, it continued, and there've since been a number of sequels. So, but that initial controversy, I think, showed how certain sections of America, and as I say, it seemed to be sort of parents groups in particular, who seemed to be under the impression that their 4-year-old and 5-year-old kids were going to go out and see this thing.
Well, the thing is, the problem in America, you can't you?
Well, I guess so.
You can just take an adult, take the kid in with him, boom, you started, no problem.
Yeah, and seeing Santa with an axe was going to sort of traumatize a generation for life. But
well, he's got to clear the snow some way, hasn't he? Can't just come down the chimney and hope with all the snow on top of it. He didn't have his brush and his snow plow on the front of his sleigh, so he just picked up an axe. Chop away the snow, no problem.
Yeah, we did have a British equivalent around that time. There were very, very few British slasher movies made in the wake of Halloween and Friday the 13th. It tended to be a sort of American and Canadian concern. And it never really translated into British cinema, apart from one film, and it was a Christmas film, Don't Open Till Christmas. And they ring the changes in Britain in this one. It's incredibly cheaply made again, and it's an absolute disaster. There's a making of documentary, like a behind the scenes documentary that is more dramatic than the film. But in terms of directors coming and going and actors coming and going and all sorts. But the twist in this one is it's not Santa doing the murders, it's someone going out killing Santa Clauses, multiple ones. So it's terrible, it's great fun, and we're not going to be able to show a Christmas horror film at Quad this year, but I think next time we do, we've got to put Don't Open Till Christmas high on the list.
Yeah, I mean, we've shown a few Christmas horrors over the years. We showed Christmas Evil, again, a title begging to be made into a film, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, and that's one of the great ones. Yeah,
and that is a good one. Yeah, absolutely. But more recently, obviously, we've had Krampus. We've had the Scandinavian movie Rare Exports, which was very good. But none of these have been mass hits in the same way, and I think that maybe ties into what we've been talking about people wanting comfort and wanting to feel good. I think
so. Yeah, there's a sort of horror crowd that will go and see the Christmas horror films, but I don't think they translate much beyond that. Whereas you make something like a new version of A Christmas Carol, or you do something like the Schwarzenegger film Jingle All the Way and things like that, and people will flood in to see that at Christmas. So
I think I was a bit too old for Jingle All the Way, because when I watched that, I watched it back again recently, and I'm thinking this is like a glorified TV movie. It's not good at all.
That's what people seem to want.
I'd forgotten about it until you just mentioned it now. I got a flashback.
Go back to forgetting about it. I'm sure there's loads of people listening to this podcast now going, "What's Jingle All the Way? No, it's the greatest ever." But yeah, I was less than impressed, I must admit.
Yeah, I think that is another thing with Christmas movies. Everyone's got their favourite, and I think there are these little cliques and little groups of people and little clumps of film fans who will single out something like Jingle All the Way and defend it with their lives.
Yeah, well, if you have to fall to defend, it's fine. You have to fall because you like Jingle All the Way, then go for it. You go for it, mate. So Becky, you're obviously, you apart from the ones that you grew up watching, you're not generally a fan of Christmas schmaltz and cheese and feeling good at Christmas, Becky. You don't like to feel good at Christmas. Is that what it is?
I'm definitely more summer person, put it that way. But I just sort of have my classics, and I'm kind of complacent, really. I don't really like to branch out. And I think it's the same with everything, like with music as well. Like I listen to the same songs as everyone does at Christmas time. So yeah, my go-to films are always Elf, Home Alone, and The Muppet Christmas Carol. And then sometimes I like the Jim Carrey animation Christmas Carol. I watched that.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Okay, that's an interesting one.
I think it's just because I like the story of A Christmas Carol, I think. So I just like all the adaptations.
I must admit, I hate that animation style, because I couldn't get on board with it. I couldn't get on board. Couldn't get on board with the Polar Express either.
Oh, yeah. I didn't like the Polar Express, though. Yeah,
no,
I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I think Tom Hanks creepily animated is not.
Yeah,
doesn't
sort
say
of
Christmas to me.
Uncanny Valley. Yeah. But I think the style did suit A Christmas Carol rather better, and I think they'd sort of enhanced it a little by then. Animation and computer generated stuff always gets better as time passes. And even 6 months or a year later, that you can tell that the quality looks better. And I quite like that version of A Christmas Carol as well. And I like Jim Carrey anyway. So
I think going into what you're talking about, people dying to defend. I mean, I'm a Muppets Christmas Carol guy. I think it's the closest, arguably the closest to a pure adaptation that we've had. Bizarrely, it sticks fairly close to the original story, whereas a lot of the other ones take liberties. But the Muppets, aside from a few tweaks, adding in Gonzo, which always adds 25% to most movies. Add Gonzo to Citizen Kane, it's even more of a masterpiece. So maybe when that film came out, I was like, we don't need another Christmas Carol. We've got a perfect Christmas Carol already. There's multiple perfect Christmas Carols. We don't need another one.
I think that's the only Christmas film that I've seen in the cinema as well, like on its release. And I saw it on 3D. It was really good. I'm not a fan of 3D, but it was good. Sort of the effects, I would say, were really good.
Yeah, they pumped a lot of money into that over a course of about 3 or 4 movies. Robert Zemeckis very publicly made his failures in getting the animation right, I think, before he did Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
Polar Express being one of them.
Yeah.
So if there was one Christmas movie that you would recommend to people, obviously we've talked about the comfort ones, but if you want to maybe expand your horizons, go beyond the core 7 or 8 movies that everyone watches at Christmas, what would be the ones that you would pick out?
Well, I'm going to mention 2. As I say, I sort of stray away from the trad Christmas stuff. I suppose the nearest I get to liking a film that people might regard as a traditional Christmas movie, and it isn't a traditional Christmas movie at all, is Bad Santa from 2003.
Oh, you see, I hated that.
Oh, I loved it.
Hated it. And I know I'm in the minority. A lot of people love that movie, but it's not a Christmas movie for a start. Even though people say it is.
Why I like it.
It's not a Christmas movie because underneath it all, it hates Christmas.
Yeah.
It's basically an hour and a half rant troll of Christmas.
Yeah. Now I love Christmas.
Not into.
Yeah, I really love Christmas, but I like movies that hate Christmas, and I think it's got a real sort of John Waters feel to it. It was directed by Terry Zwigoff, he'd made that film about R. Crumb, the sort of underground comic artist in the 90s, and he was a sort of associate of R. Crumb, and you can tell that in Bad Santa. It's got that very sort of misanthropic sort of feel to it. In fact, there's a quote from the script was offered to Universal Pictures, who turned it down. I think it was one of these scripts that did the rounds of Hollywood, and everybody turned it down before eventually someone stepped in and said, yeah, we'll make this, But Universal's rejection is great. They said, this is the most foul, disgusting, misogynistic, anti-Christmas, anti-children thing that we could possibly imagine. Put that on the poster and I'm there,
Yeah, not for me, must admit. And maybe that ties into the feel-good thing.
I even like Bad Santa 2, which nobody went to see, which came out years later. So give me those as a double bill and I'm happy. Billy Bob Thornton. I'd like to see him do more.
See, I liked most of the elements of Bad Santa, but I think it was just underneath it all. I think when you watch a Christmas movie and it hates Christmas, ultimately, like The Grinch, you want to have that moment at the end where they realise that they're the problem. It's not Christmas's fault; they're the problem. And we didn't get that with Bad Santa. It was just like, no, Christmas is horrible, it's rubbish, and everyone should go home and not do it.
So what you wanted, Adam, it was for Bad Santa to become one of
Good
these.
Santa.
Yeah. You wanted it to be one of these sort of Christmas Carol in disguise movies that I mentioned, and it isn't.
I don't know what I wanted it to be, but I didn't want it to be what it was.
Resolutely avoids doing that. The other film that I wanted to mention is actually A Christmas Carol in Disguise. I'm going back to the early 60s, and Hammer Films, the home of British horror movies, stepped out of horror every now and then and made some really, really good stuff. And they did this film called Cash on Demand in 1961, which is a movie about a bank robbery. And it's a bank robbery that's mainly committed over the phone. It's all to do with the bank manager having to make phone calls and stuff. And there's that great bit at the start of Pulp Fiction where Tim Roth tells that story about someone he knows who robbed a bank with a phone. And it sort of harks back in a way to the plot of this movie, Cash on Demand. And you've got Peter Cushing giving his very, very best performance ever, in my view, playing the bank manager. And he's very sort of controlling and looking for any excuse to get rid of his staff and really sort of run the bank to his own particular design and his own particular rules. And then suddenly there's this attempt at this bank robbery where someone calling themselves Colonel Gore Hepburn, played by Andre Morel, comes into the bank and makes Peter Cushing telephone his house to find out that his wife is being held supposedly by an associate of the Colonel, and that they've got to sort of deposit all the money from the bank in a certain place in order that his family will be released. And it's a great, really, really taut movie. It's all told in real time. Peter Cushing's absolutely marvellous in it. It's in black and white, very sort of stark, very austere. And then under the surface, you gradually begin to realise that the bank manager is Scrooge. The employee that he's trying to sack, who's worked at the bank for 50 years, is Bob Cratchit, and that the Colonel is Jacob Marley. So, Cash on Demand is one that I'd recommend. The sort of thing that might turn up on Talking Pictures TV, I think. So look out for that. That's my recommendation.
That was put out on Blu-ray, wasn't it, recently, with the Indicator box?
Yeah,
Is that
Indicator
right?
have done it, yes, yeah.
Okay, so if you want to track that down, you can get it on Blu-ray in pristine quality for this Christmas, maybe. Maybe put it on your Christmas list, who knows?
Definitely.
Have you got anything, Becky, for us?
Well, I was going to say, I think everyone has a sort of film that they watch at Christmas, and it might not necessarily be a Christmas film. For me and my mum, ever since it was released, we love watching Silver Linings Playbook with Jennifer Lawrence and Bradley Cooper, and it's just that towards the end when they do the dance and the famous scene when she sort of runs out of the dance hall and he runs after her, and me and my mum, we always watch that. We sort of have a movie marathon every Christmas Eve into Christmas morning, and that's always our last film. So for me, that's the ultimate Christmas film. But I remember talking to friends of mine and they said, oh yeah, we've got the same, like there's one particular film that every family watches, and it might not have any reference to Christmas in it, but you always watch it Christmas
it's one of those
Eve.
things where I think a lot of it's shaped, particularly my generation and even more so Daryl's generation, is that a lot of it's shaped by what was on television at Christmas.
Yeah.
And I think Wizard of Oz has become a weird Christmas movie now.
And things like the Bond films are always associated with Christmas, and the Great Escape and things like that, just because they were on Christmas afternoon or Boxing Day or whatever.
Absolutely. And Empire Strikes Back because of the snow.
Yeah. I like films as well that sort of aren't Christmas movies, but touch on Christmas in maybe one or two scenes. Like, I mean, one of the big ones is The French Connection, where, right at the start of the movie, you've got Popeye Doyle, Gene Hackman, dressed as Santa. He's on some kind of stakeout or some kind of undercover assignment, dressed as Father Christmas. And I love that. And then Christopher Plummer in the movie The Silent Partner robs a bank dressed as Santa. It's not a Christmas movie, but he goes in dressed as Santa and robs a bank. So yeah, I really like those films that sort of play on that sort of festive iconography. Just in one or two scenes, you know.
I was just looking over sort of like Christmas movies and things like that, and I think we're onto something with the sort of like boom of the 80s, 90s, sort of like the Christmas film became much more of a thing before there was isolated cases here and there, Miracle on 34th Street, you know, It's a Wonderful Life, obviously those kind of things. Santa Claus versus the Martians, you know, those kind of one-offs, as it were. Well, it seems to really ramp up in the 80s and 90s, doesn't it?
Definitely.
I mean, and also you got weirdly sort of like, as much as we're watching a lot of the American movies, and it's very much an American and Canadian thing, some films just didn't come up. I mean, A Christmas Story is a really big Christmas film in America, but it's barely made an impact over here. The Bob Clark movie from the early 80s.
Yeah. I think that's just about. You talk to any American, and they'll mention that as the
Their
Christmas
favourite.
movie. Yeah. And it's just nothing over here. I think
not
people
at all.
have seen it, but it's not big. You know, it's not.
No, I mean we tried to screen it at Quad a couple of years ago, maybe a few years ago now, but it didn't get much traction at all. You know, we had a handful of people come and see it, but nothing. The die-hard Christmas fans, but nothing. Yeah, it didn't impact beyond that, which is fascinating.
It's a good movie, and I can see why it's big in America. But yeah, it just doesn't travel.
An interesting film as well. Just the director is it? I mean, we're talking eclectic careers or moving where the money is, or however you want to describe it. But Bob Clark, director of A Christmas Story, Black Christmas, Porky's.
You know? Did lots of horror films in the 70s, including Black Christmas, as you say.
Yeah.
So yeah, weird career, but
very strange. But arguably, he made two classic Christmas movies, because Black Christmas, which we've not spoken about previously, arguably one of the forerunners of the slasher movie genre.
Yeah, pre-Halloween, big influence on all that stuff that came along later.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, maybe we should be talking about Bob Clark more.
Maybe do a podcast on him sometime.
Absolutely.
I think he's worth talking about. So
I think it's interesting for me when I think about the Christmas films I've seen. Yeah, it seems like they're very late 80s, early 90s, and then it jumped to the early 2000s, and then you had a cluster. Then now you now and again get a few.
I think recently we're definitely seeing the impact of Netflix on the Christmas movie, and I think in a similar way to I guess the Hallmark Channel. You know, if you think there's not been Christmas movies made in the last 15, 20 years, you're not watching the Hallmark Channel.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they're making about 60 a year, you know. Ready for
and a lot of those that come over to the UK are start getting shown on Channel 5 in about mid September, you know, and then run through to January. So
movies to wrap presents by, I think it's the umbrella. You don't have to worry too much about the plot because it's not that heavy.
Well, it's always the same in every film.
Yeah, wrap your presents. If you jump back in towards the end of the second act, you won't have missed much. It's just stuff happening, and then we'll crack on to the finale. You know, those kind of budgets. But I think Netflix have taken that style of that model of creating Christmas movies, and added a bit of quality to it. So you've had things like obviously the Christmas Chronicles recently with Kurt Russell as Santa Claus, which was a riot and good fun, and I think that's going to become one of those Christmas favourites going forward. Sequel's not great, but you know, you're spending time with Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn as Santa and Mrs. Claus.
So they're doing Hallmark movies, but with real actors,
with proper actors and decent budgets and better scripts. To be fair, I mean, there was also the animated movie a couple of years ago, Klaus, which was very good. And they did Jingle Jangle this year, the musical. So they seem to be a little Christmas studio in some ways, cranking out movies. So maybe it's not the end of the Christmas movies in the cinema. Maybe it's just bypassing cinemas for the moment, going to Netflix.
Yeah, I'm sure Christmas will be back at cinemas in future years, definitely.
I think definitely Die Hard's. You can't see Die Hard. Die Hard doesn't. I mean, I've watched Die Hard this year on the small screen because obviously our cinemas shut until New Year now, so we're going to miss out on our Christmas double bill. So I've watched it at home, and it's not the same. Not the same.
No. You need. That's a film that you need to see on the big screen, and ideally, you need to see the double bill.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, we did an experiment with it at home this year. My theory, my wish was always to show Die Hard 2 first and then end on Die Hard, because we watched Die Hard double bill and you go out on the second one, which isn't it's good, but it's not as good as the first one. So you end up watching the great one and then sitting through a good one, and you leave the cinema feeling, I've not seen a good movie, I've not seen a great movie. So in my head, I was like, well, can't we just flip them and show Die Hard 2 first and then Die Hard to end? So we did that this year. And it worked for the feeling and the emotions. I came out of the double bill thinking that was amazing. But yeah, it doesn't really make much sense. There you go. Cool. Okay, so I guess that wraps up Christmas. We've done it. We've nailed it. Moving on. Let's kick on. We are going to take a hiatus from the Cinelit podcast now until the new year. We will be back with various topics, eclectic range of topics. Maybe we'll do that Bob Clark one in the new year too. Thank you, everyone who's been listening to the podcast this year. It's been a very interesting first year for us. When we launched our podcast in February earlier on this year, there was no global pandemic. And
who knew? Yeah,
who knew? Yeah, what a year we've had, and it has definitely changed how we've done the podcast. And arguably for the better. So hopefully we will continue on in the new year. Well, we will continue on in the new year with a really good range of topics. Yeah, cool. So Merry Christmas, everybody, and we will see you in the new year.
Yeah, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.